realise you're actually quite busy people, and it's just a great opportunity to obviously start putting faces to name and start to get to know people as well too. So thank you for coming along. But before we obviously kick off with the presentation, what we need to do is cover off the health and safety component. So I'm just going to invite Liz to come up here and just to cover that off, and then we can just kick in from there.
Hey team, welcome. Welcome to Xero HQ, the big black box, as some like to call it. Before we kick off, I'll just cover some housekeeping admin. But quickly, my name's Liz Lorigan. I'm the Senior Account Manager based here in Wellington for Xero, and I'm lucky enough to look after Kelvin and the Illumin crew. And a lot of work's gone into putting tonight on from Kelvin and the team. Some of you might know that we had another go at booking this in a couple of months ago, and then with alert level changes, so we're very fortunate to be here tonight. So before I hand over to the big boss, quickly, bathrooms are just as you came in, past the kitchen on your left-hand side. In the unlikely event of a fire, we've got fire exits directly behind me, which take you to our assembly point on Wakefield Street in the car park. In the very unlikely event of an earthquake, drop, cover, hold. And please don't leave the building unless any alarms sound. And finally, if you do see any scribblings of deep dark Xero secrets on whiteboards or notebooks, please leave them at the door. I had to say that last little bit. But otherwise, we're in for a special evening. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Righty-ho. So, what is tonight going to look like? Well, initially, when we actually looked at tonight, we were actually going to jump into a bit of a tie early on, and then we were going to jump into the presentation. But we've done such a good job just having a sit down. We thought, well, actually, let's flip it on its head. Let's get into the presentation, and after the presentation, then it's sausage rolls and sandwiches and a couple of drinkies and a bit of a conversation. So yeah, so that's actually sitting out the back. But before that, why don't I just go about and introduce myself? My name is Kelvin Trumper, and as you can see, I'm the Client Software Services Manager at Illumin Accounting. I say software because prior to actually working with Illumin, I actually spent quite a few years working with software companies. So much so that one of the first software companies I actually worked for is actually one of the first Xero integrators. Now, if you don't keep up on the news in terms of what's going on in the software space, when we started working with Xero, there was probably about 5 or 6 software integrators. They've just recently announced that there's actually over 1,000 integrators who are officially on their register. So that means that there's actually a lot of choice out there. So that's, Xero's obviously is growing. They're an exciting company, New Zealand based obviously, and we're in the head office. And there's some great things that this application can do for companies. And so the hope is that when you actually go away today, that you're going to pick up some little tricks, little tips that are actually going to make your life just that little bit easier when it comes to actually managing your finances and also managing your businesses moving forward. So before we kick it off, I'd like you to actually do some thinking. I'd like you to actually take a couple of minutes just to think about sort of how much time you actually spend on your finances each month. It's an interesting question, and I see a snigger just right there straight away, because it is one of those things that we obviously need to think about. So I'll give you a couple of secs just to think about it. So who here would say that their average or their monthly finance management would be under 4 hours a month or 1 hour a week? Raise hands. About 4 to 8 hours a month. Starting to get up there, isn't it? 8 to 20 hours? Yeah. Starting to get quite a lot, isn't it? And the big one, he's actually spending more than 20 hours a month working on your finances and administration. So it's 8 to 20. That's our sweet spot. that's reality, isn't it? We spend so much time working in our finances and doing our invoicing and chasing debt that a day can actually just go just like that. An 8-hour period, you'd just be sitting there and going, wow, where has that gone? So what we're trying to actually do, and I see a couple of people just nodding their heads there, what we're going to do today is hopefully we're going to try to give you some sort of additional tools on how to use your Xero application just that much better. So what is that going to look like? Well, we've got basically three parts of this presentation. The first part is, that's cool, some little tricks and tips that you may not know of that are basically sitting out there in front of you that you just didn't know. We've got wow, that's impressive. That's just diving just that little bit deeper because there's some great functionality associated with Xero, but you don't know what you don't know. So what we're going to do is we're going to deep dive a little bit into those so we can get a better understanding about what those functions can do and how they can actually create improvements for you. But finally, oh my God, it's going to change my life and it's also going to make my accountant happy. There's some great little functions associated with Xero. As accountants, we like to see people actually using their systems as best as they possibly could. Because if they do, it really does make a lot of our lives a lot easier as well too. So the hope is at the end of tonight, you're going to be in a position where you can actually take away some little tricks that are also going to make our life just that little bit simpler as well too. So I really hope that you enjoy the session, and let's just kick into it. So as we go through the process, we talk about tricks and tips and about saving time. This part here is about sort of what is the potential time saving we're actually going to create. Some of these tricks and tips will potentially create a couple of minutes with the effort. Some of these tricks and tips will potentially create about an hour worth of time saving. So it's really trying to get an understanding about what these potential tricks and tips can actually do. So as we go out throughout the process, we're going to be keeping an eye on these tricks and tips, and hopefully at the end of the presentation, we're going to be in a position to get a good understanding about how much time saving is actually created by using the system just that much better. Rightio, so let's kick into it. So the first feature that we want to talk about is accessibility. When you're in your Xero dashboard, there's a whole lot of ways in which you can actually access features and functions within Xero. Even though Xero have made the navigation relatively simple, there are certain things there that can potentially actually make your life just that little bit simpler. And if one of those things is the plus sign. Now, who here has actually seen the plus sign before, which is in the top left-hand corner? And has anybody actually used it? We've got one person using it. It's actually a really good feature. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to jump into a video to actually show you what that feature can actually do for you. So as you can see, we've actually just ticked on that screen here, and it's actually opened up a whole new set of functions. And that whole new set of functions actually aids you in actually moving from what potentially be multiple clicks into a single click opportunity. So that in itself is actually a neat little feature that's associated with it, but we just don't know about it. And that's why it's actually quite a neat thing to show today, because something like that, if we were to actually put it in context, a couple of clicks, that's probably saving you about 4 seconds a click. And you're like, well, 4 seconds a click, what does that mean? Well, if you times that by sort of the 10 invoices, now we're actually starting to get up there in time. If we times that by 20 invoices on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, that time is actually starting to accrue. So the quicker that we can actually get to a certain point as in going straight into an invoice, the better that we're going to be. So in terms of time saved, as I said, potentially what we can be doing just by actually using the plus button or the plus icon is actually saving upwards of 4 minutes in our efforts on a daily basis. it'll start to accrue as we go through this as well too, and you'll start to see where that actually is. And speaking of shortcuts, who here uses invoices within Xero? Is there a faster way that we can actually add in dates in our invoices? Well, actually, yes, there is. Xero have actually been quite good in terms of what they've done from a functionality perspective, because traditionally what we'd do is we'd actually go to the calendar and we'd actually select our date, and then we would actually go to our due date and we would actually select our date as well. They've actually added in some functionality within the invoices that can actually speed this process up. So if we actually were to look at this, what would that look like? Well, in this instance here, rather than actually typing in the calendar, I'm actually typing in last W, last week. It's going to automatically default back to the last week. I can actually go -7, and it will actually default back to last week. But with the due dates as well too, it actually has exactly the same functionality. So what I can do is, if we're issuing invoices and due dates, I can actually say +7. I can actually say +20. And what that does is it actually speeds up the whole process in terms of adding in invoices. So it's actually a really neat little function. And this in itself, yet again, is also going to be a time saver. But you just don't know what you don't know until you actually see it. So, we talked about time saving as well too. So if we're looking at those invoices and we're saying, okay, well that's actually improving our time. We're saying 10 invoices, it's going to be 4 minutes per 4 minutes over those invoices, plus the 4 minutes that we've saved with using the plus button. We're actually now actually adding up to 8 minutes. And here is a neat little shortcut that a lot of you probably have never considered or seen. How many people have actually hunted for a calculator when they're actually doing their calculations and pricing up their invoices? Yeah, quite a few. Right. Well, that's the great thing about Xero in terms of the invoices. Quite often we might see something like this. What we have to do is we want to look at charging, let's say, a 15% markup on it. Well, rather than actually chasing for and hunting for a calendar, what we can do is we can actually go straight into the invoice. And when we go straight into the invoice, what we can actually start doing is we can actually start adding that information straight into the appropriate columns. We write in the description. We write in the quantity, we add a price. But with the price, what we do is we actually add an asterisk and we go 1.15. And what that will do is it will automatically work out that markup that you wanted to apply to the invoice. So you've actually got a built-in calculator. Such a neat tool. If I want to add a 20% markup, all I do is I go to the quantity. I put in the quantity, I put in the price, and I go asterisk 1.2. And literally that'll work out my 20% markup. Such a neat little feature. But as I said, this is all about the learning, and once we actually know these features are available to us, that'll obviously give us an opportunity where we can actually potentially explore more. So, if we actually looked at using the calculator within the invoices, rather than actually hunting for our calculators and getting a little bit grumpy because we can't find one, or the battery's flat because it's solar powered, we could probably save in excess of 23 odd minutes just by using that sort of feature if we're actually issuing up to 10 plus invoices in a session. So that in itself is actually a great little time saving as well. So the next little tip is reconciliation. In the past, what we've done from a reconciliation perspective is, let's just say we've had $100 come through, and the invoice was for $99.95. There's a 5 cents variance there. In the past, we would actually go through the process of probably adjusting the invoice and reconciling it off. But Xero actually makes a minor adjustment a relatively simple process, because what it does do is it does actually cater for minor adjustments. And a lot of you have probably seen this before. When you go into your Xero reconciliation screen, it picks up an invoice. You know it's actually sitting there, but the dollar value is different, or the cent value is different. So what we do in the first instance is we actually jump into our match. We know who the client is. We jump up, we search for that particular invoice, and we can actually see it there. That invoice, as you can see, has a 2 cent variance. So we're not going to go in and we're not going to actually make the adjustment at the invoice level, because what Xero does do is it does actually cater for the fact that we can make a minor adjustment. Right. Now, as you can see, in this instance here, it's greyed out. We have selected it, but because there's that 2 cents there, it's just not going to let us go any further. So what we need to do is we need to click on this button. And this button allows us to make an adjustment, whether it be a bank fee, or it allows us to make a minor adjustment, which is within the 1 or 2 cent sort of variance there. And if we select that, and we actually click on it and say 0.02, what it will do is it will actually allow us to actually reconcile that moving forward. Does anybody actually use that feature? So in terms of time saved, just by actually being in a position where we can actually reconcile by making a minor adjustment, we are literally saving a couple of minutes if it's a couple of invoices that we need to do on a daily basis. So we're actually starting to build up our time. We've almost saved over an hour's worth of effort, literally by the functions that we've actually worked through today. And these are all functions that have been sitting there, that are available. It's just that we don't know what we don't know. So on to the next part. Wow, that's impressive. Righty-ho. There's a neat little function within Xero which allows us to create what we call recurring invoices. And what these do is they allow us to actually create an invoice template. And that invoice template, depending on what type of information is actually attached in that information, will actually will populate and become a draft, whether it be a week, whether it be a month, or whether it be the days that you specify. So this is actually good if you're actually doing a subscription-based type service, or you've actually got a set number of fees that go out to clients. This particular feature is very, very handy, because we can actually set it up as a template, and on a monthly basis, depending on what it is, it will actually come in into a draft ready for you to approve and ready for you to actually send to a client. So it does become what's called a bit of a set and forget. And that's a neat little feature, because quite often, and I've been guilty of it as well, I do forget to actually raise an invoice every once in a while. It certainly has happened in the past. So this little feature is definitely something that could actually, I think, help. So what does it look like? Well, in this particular example, we've got an invoice here that we've created in the past, and we've gone, well, hang on a minute. We could probably create this, this is going to be a standing invoice. We're going to create a recurring invoice off it. So what we can do is we can go into the options, and then we can actually say create repeating invoice. At this point here, we specify what that invoice is going to look like, whether it goes out weekly, whether it goes out monthly, and also whether it's got a a period in which it's actually going to close off, i.e. Is this only going to be for a 12-month period? So you do have the ability to lock that as well too. In this instance here, it's saving as a draft. So a draft invoice, once it's turned into an invoice, allows you to actually look at the information that sits within the invoice. Check to see whether the accounts are right, check to see whether the dollar values are right. You can make any adjustments, and then you can actually approve it from that point on. At this here as well too, you can actually put in what's called placeholders. So if it's a monthly invoice, you've got the ability to actually add a placeholder, and when you actually issue that invoice, within that placeholder, it will say, it will tell you which month it is. It also, there is the feature for week as well too. And that itself is actually a good little feature as well too, because it helps the customer reconcile as well. If the invoice is going out, they can see it's an April invoice, that's obviously something they're going to action. So it's actually a neat little feature. And as I said, it's created as a recurring invoice or repeating invoice. It sits there as a template, and when we need to use it again, it will automatically create the draft invoice from that point. And has anybody used that at all? You were a governor. So in terms of what that means from an invoicing perspective, a repeating invoice, because it's actually set up ready for you to go, all you need to do in terms of actioning that and improving it and sending it out is hit approve and send. So, from a time saving perspective, if we're looking at sort of 7 to 10 invoices, it's going to save you almost half an hour's worth of effort every time. So it's a neat little feature. But there are clients that repeating invoices actually will not be fit for purpose. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a way that we can actually speed up their invoicing processes as well. Right? Because there's a neat little feature within Xero, which is all about items. And this is all about what we call our products and services. So if we set up our products and services, what that allows us to do is it allows us to use a template of selling items to actually apply to an invoice. And in this case here, what we've done is we've gone into business and we've gone into products and services, and this is our list of products and services that we've got available to sell. Okay? And I'm adding a new item, and in this instance, I'm actually going to call I'm going to give it a code of HC, and we'll say an hourly charge. I'm going to say that we don't purchase this item, but we actually sell this item. Right? And because it's a service, we're not going to track this, because tracking is all about managing product. Right? With regards to what it looks like in terms of unit price, we're adding in our charge rate, we're adding in our sales amount, and then we're also adding in our tax rate as well too, with a description. Once we hit save, that goes into our list. And what that means is, when we're actually raising an invoice, we can actually go to that invoice and we can actually use that item moving forward. Okay. So here's an example of an invoice which has been drafted, and we've used our +7 here, our +10 as you can see. We've typed in our HC, which is our hourly charge, and just like that, hey presto, we've actually got a line item on our invoice. So that in itself is a neat little feature. So whilst, and this feature is predominantly associated with, as I said earlier on, not being in a position to actually utilise recurring invoices. A great way where we can actually raise invoices quick and effectively and actually distribute them out to the clients in a timely manner. So in terms of effort, if you're issuing out, let's say 10 or 20 invoices in a session, and you're having to manually type them all out, that can take time. By adding in an item and being in a position where you can actually assign it to an invoice, it can potentially save you upwards of an hour's worth of effort, which I think is actually a good time-saving measure as well too. So it's well worth actually having a look at. easier way to track the performance of different parts of my business? Well, actually there is. Xero is actually a great tool because what it does do is it actually allows us to actually break down our profit and loss by using what's called a tracking feature. And in this example, what I'm going to show you is an example of a photographer who wants to know how specific parts of his business are actually doing, whether it be the wedding photos that he takes a lot of, or the other photos which are family portraits. So if we look at this example, what we do have here within the invoice is photo shoots. And what he's got there is he's got family and he's got weddings. So what this means, once this invoice is issued, is it allows you to actually start to analyse different facets of your business and determine sort of what is profitable or not. Or it'll save you a lot of time having to run an account transaction report, maybe even export it into Excel, and actually run through the whole process of trying to annotate what specific features or functions of the business is actually raising you the most revenue. But because we've actually created the tracking systems here as well too, what this allows us to do is when we're actually running the account transactions reports, for example, it allows us to actually select all or just specific functions that we want to look at, i.e. whether it needs to be the wedding or whether it needs to be the family portraits. And not only can we actually filter within our account transactions with our tracking, but we can actually also filter with our profit and loss as well too. So yet again, it's a great way in which we can actually further dive deep into our business and get a better understanding. And that's the great thing about Xero, because what it does do is it allows us to actually just think this that a little bit deeper. A lot of people will look at the reports when they first look at it and go, well, actually, they're quite rigid, but there is a lot of filters that are available to people. And by using those filters, we're in a position where we can actually use that information further. So if we're looking at time saved with regards to analysing data, well, if we exported our data out and we started doing all sorts of formulas and we started, trying to slice and dice data, we're probably spending about 60 minutes to an hour just looking at a basic set of functions. Whereas just by setting up tracking, we're in a position where we can actually just go pretty much like that after a simple period. Right, and here's an easy one that I thought. Here's a beauty that I think is fantastic for those business owners who have got age receivables. Quite often, we've been in a position where we've had to track down our customers' debt. What Xero allows us to do allows us to make it just a little bit simpler, because in the past we've probably gone age receivables, go to our contacts, look for a phone number, make the phone call, issue the letters, and so on and so forth. Whereas what we have here is a situation where the age receivable summary has a selection of columns and filters that we can select. And these columns and filters take our age receivables to the next level. Because what they allow us to do is they allow us to actually add in the primary contact with the age receivables, the email address, the phone number. So this particular list here becomes your call list as well. And that in itself is potentially going to be quite a good time saver for all those who want to continue to maintain appropriate levels of debt. So that is a great feature that very few people use. So in terms of time saving, well, from an individual's perspective, if we're looking at chasing debt, we're looking at maybe jumping onto a telephone, raising a letter, sending that out. It's probably about sort of 20 minutes effort per individual. So depending on what level of depth we've got sitting out there, that is actually potentially quite a lot of time saving. Rightio, and here's the good stuff. Oh my God, this is going to change my life and make my accountant happy. And a lot of these features are based on my experiences, and a lot of the features are based on the experiences that I've had with my peers as well too. The first one that we want to look at is, as I talked about earlier on, was the age receivables or chasing debt. Who here actually uses the automated invoice reminders in Xero? That in itself is worth the event alone. Because what Xero actually caters for is the ability where we can actually set up automatic reminders based on due dates. So if I was to actually look at this in context, we go into our business and we go into our invoices. And what we have here is we have a clock that probably a lot of you would have seen before but didn't realise what actually it's used for. That's actually our invoice reminders. So if we were to click in it, what that is going to do is it's actually going to open up a new page. And these invoice reminders are actually turned off in the first instance, but they're set to 7, 14 and 21 days by default. That's adjustable. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to actually create a structured system where we can actually constantly remind people who actually have debts outstanding. And as you can see here in this instance, we're in a position where we're actually adjusting or altering the text, and we're also selecting the different periods as well too, because as I said, it's 7, 14 and 21 days is default. You can actually change it to whatever you see fit. You can actually include the invoice in the quick link, or you can actually include it in the PDF invoice as well too. But the other thing is that here, don't send reminders to amounts that are less than a specified amount. And in this instance, if you've got a long relationship with a client and you know eventually they'll pay and it's $1 or $2, which is outstanding, you don't want to be in a position where you're constantly bombarding them and chasing them for that amount. That's about managing relationships more than anything. So you can actually set a minimal amount for it to actually distribute out. So it's a great feature, and for those who are actually raising invoices in the room tonight, I definitely think that it's something you should actually consider. So, time saved? Well, as I said earlier on with the age receivables, what we do have is a situation where we're actually constantly having to chase debt. Well, this is a way and means in which we can actually potentially speed up that process. And we're talking about potentially 60 minutes worth of effort. Right. Something that we come across quite a lot of at Ilumin, which is the ability to transfer funds from one account to another. We do have the capacity to do that, and I know that there are a number of you in here that actually do use transfers. But what we find is that when people are actually using transfers, more often than not, we're actually having to do a cleanup in a number of areas. And that could be going through reconciliations, spend money or receive money is actually being created instead of a transfer. But what Xero actually provisions us to do is to actually transfer funds that are actually sitting within Xero. Let's say that we've got two accounts. One account is going to be the giver.
Between. Find the transaction.
Yeah. Let's let's not find that transaction. So what Xero allows us to do is it allows us to actually transfer funds from one account to another. And to do that, back to the video. When we actually transfer the money physically, there's two parts to the equation. The first part is the spend money part. Which account does it come out of? What we do is we actually click on the transfer tab within the reconciliation. We actually find the bank account that transfer belongs to, and then we click OK. But that's the first part. There's actually a second part to the bank transfer, and this is where a few people can get it mixed up. Because what we need to do is we need to go into the second bank account. And when we go into the second bank account, because we've actually created the transfer from the first bank account, when we go into it, it will automatically be green. And when you know it's green, that's when you know it's been transferred correctly. I talk about this a bit because we actually do see quite a lot of it in terms of cleaning up people's accounts when it comes to reconciliations. So it's just one of those things that we wanted to highlight as an accounting practice that just to keep in front of it, just so that we're actually doing it properly. Time saved? Well, I say it's probably about 20 minutes, because what usually happens is you jump into your bank account and you actually see that there's this bit of a disparity there. You start thinking about it, and then all of a sudden we get the phone call, and then what usually happens at that point is we can actually see where the transaction is actually needs to be rectified and cleaned up straight away. So it's probably about 20 minutes worth of effort on your behalf, and probably some of us on our behalf as well. Is there a way that we can store financial documents in Xero? Wow, this here is a great tool. And my time at Illumin, every time I actually go and have a look at Xero accounts, it's always interesting to see how many people are actually using this as a feature. Files is built into every subscription that we have. And what Files allows us to do is to create what's called a document repository. And what that means is that if there's anything that's associated with your finances, you can actually store it up there. And why is that good? Well, it does make our lives a lot simpler. Because what that means is we're not having to constantly chase information. We're in a position here where we can actually click on upload, select a file, and actually load it into our files. But what about the invoices that come through emails? Well, they've also catered for that as well. Because what we are in a position to do is we're able to copy that particular email address, and we're able to send attachments into our files. Literally lands in our files. But to make our lives just that little bit easier as well, we like to keep things a little bit tidier. It's, okay, how do we actually create a new folder structure? And we've just started a new financial year. It'd be great if there was a folder that was sitting in there and it said 2022. And we loaded all of those documents into that folder. And from our perspective, we're in a position where we know where all that documentation is going to be. So you can see how that's actually going to be a time saver.
So how do you actually get into files?
Yes, so the beauty about it is within your Xero subscription, you've got the name of your company. You just need to click on that name, and what will happen is it will open up, you'll see files within the menu. So in terms of time saved, yeah, easily. Easily we could say an hour, both sides as well too. because, you know, when it comes to us doing end-year accounts, you know, there's specific information that's required, rather than actually having to constantly email and call and phone and email and call and phone again and email and call and phone. We can actually go to a centralised spot where potentially that information is going to be available to us, and that would just make life a lot easier for all involved. Right. Now, we talked about the fact that there's actually an email address for loading files into, loading attachments into files. The great thing about Xero is it actually does have a similar functionality that's associated with the bills that we actually receive as well. So if you've got a number of suppliers that are actually sending you bills, and it could be via an attachment, what we are in a position to do is we're actually in a position to go to our business, go to our bills to pay, and can you see where it's rounded there? And that's create a bill from email. And we can copy that, and we can actually use that email address, and we can actually forward a bill. And when we actually forward that bill, it will actually go into our drafts. Now the bills themselves, once they actually land in our drafts, won't be fully annotated or won't be fully populated. But there'll be little lightning strikes next to those bills, because Xero would have tried to, as best as possible, read as much as that bill as they can. And once they've actually read what they can read, they will actually post the bill as a draft. So that in itself is a really neat function associated with Xero. And as you can see in this example, we still need to fill out the contact details, but what's sitting there with the lightning bolt has actually been read by Xero, and so the bill itself is all but ready to actually be approved and to go into your payables. So that, as a feature, is a really, really good feature. And in terms of time saving, yet again, rather than having to type out all this information, we're in a position where we can actually let the technology do the work for us. So a great feature to actually consider moving forward. Right. Working with your accountant to make the right decision. As I said, I was actually working with a software company prior to actually working with Illumin. And I've actually been quite fortunate because I've actually seen I've seen the other side. I've seen what technology can do with business. And that's been really a great experience from my perspective being with Illumin, because as we actually evolve as an organisation, we're looking at ways and means in which we can actually provide additional services. And one of those services is obviously is our software support. I talked earlier on that there is over 1,000 applications that actually do feed into Xero. It is a minefield out there. And what we want to do is we actually want to be in a position where we can actually help you with that minefield. And that means that from an accounting perspective, and in my particular role, I really actually want to help as many people as I can identify those applications that can actually work with their business and work for their business. Within the Xero ecosystem alone, we've got Xero Expenses, Xero Projects, Xero Payroll, and Workflow Max. But on top of that, we've actually got other applications like HubDoc, for example. And then we're diving into the over 1,000 applications. And which way do you go? Well, we want to be in a position where we can actually assist you with those. So I talked about the 1,000 applications, and one of the things that you can do as an individual is you can actually you can definitely go and have a look at what's actually available to you. literally by following this image here, it takes me straight into the app store. And it's great that we've obviously got stars there, but fundamentally what we need to do is find out what's actually going to be fit for purpose for your business. So making a selection isn't as easy as adding an application into your Xero ecosystem. What we need to do is we need to actually sit down and we need to look at what your needs are. And when we actually have defined your needs, then we're in a position where we can potentially help you by going to market on your behalf. So, from my perspective, that slide that we just talked about before, where I sit within the ecosystem of Ilumin accounting, is a very important thing to me because it's near and dear to my heart. I know there are a lot of applications out there. I used to work for one of those add-on partners. But it's about actually being in a position where we can actually provide additional services over and above what we have in the past, which is predominantly being compliance. So we like to think that if you're going into the market and you're actually looking at other software applications, please do give us a call because we're actually here to help. And what we've done, just by actually looking at those little tidbits that you didn't know what you didn't know was there, we've probably saved in excess of 10 hours worth of effort. And we talked about that 8 to 20 hour sweet spot earlier on as being that area where a lot of people were in. Well, we've actually eaten away a big chunk of it just by actually by running through these tricks and tips alike. So to sum up, as I've said, Ilumin Accountants is here to not only provide compliance services, but we're in a position where we can actually provide you services associated with software as well. And we'd like to help you with that. And we know that there are a lot of you out there who are actually thinking about going down that pathway of adding software to your ecosystem. Please do give us a call, contact us, and we'll actually do a lot of the groundwork for you. I hope you appreciated the presentation tonight, and I hope that you've actually taken away some neat little features. There's some neat stuff there, and I can promise you there is actually a lot more. We just want to talk to you more about that. So thank you for coming along. Thank you for listening to me. We do actually have some sandwiches and we do have some sausage rolls and there is some drinks there. So please do mingle, get to know each other, and yeah, I'd be happy to take questions.